Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. Today I have the pleasure of company of Pandit Satish Sharma ji from across the pond, that is United Kingdom, and he's joining us after a brief hiatus. For some reason we couldn't connect, and now we are back on the same hangout. So without further ado, let me welcome Pandit Satish Sharma ji. Pandit ji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Sree Pranam, Namaskar. It's a pleasure to be with you, and my apologies for the hiatus. There has been so much happening here in the United Kingdom, and I know you've been traveling, so we've just not been able to synchronize. But we have a bundle of news of all sorts to share with your viewers today, and so let's get cracking.
Absolutely, and I would like to start out by this unfortunate stabbing that resulted in the death of a sitting Conservative Member of Parliament, Sir David Amess. What can you share about this incident, Panditji, and has the perpetrator been caught?
Gee, it's a shock for us, actually. The country is still recovering from the news that a very gentle and devoted Conservative Member of Parliament, Sir David Amess, he was stabbed multiple times, and fatally so, whilst he was just conducting a constituency surgery. So he was at his home, he was at his surgery in a Baptist church, meeting members of his constituency, trying to assist them with their problems and issues. And somebody walked in and stabbed him multiple times. Now, the perpetrator was caught at the scene, and his identity has been established, and they're now exploring the motive. But at this moment in time, the police have already announced that the individual was a Somali, probably a member of the community who came here as a refugee not so long ago. And the police have also announced an Islamist connection that they're investigating. So this is a dreadful event that's occurred. And it one of its impacts is it's made the whole political space toxicity was increasing, but now this has added an extra dimension of fear, and the mood and the atmosphere nationally has suddenly taken a turn for the worse. So it's quite a horrific event, and we all feel very much for his family. Sir David, I think, was a typical British politician. Very well respected, always one of the hard-working members of Parliament in the House, and everybody who has spoken about him has spoken very, very highly of him. So it's truly a tragedy. There is some mention already that his voting record may have been partly contributory to this event. But irrespective of a person's voting record in the House, the response, this aggressive, violent killing of a gentleman whilst he's going around his public duties is entirely unacceptable. But the police are investigating. We're waiting for more information to be announced. You know, I mentioned the mood of the nation. There are a couple of points I'd probably like to share, and that is that we've seen in the United Kingdom the political environment becoming increasingly toxic. There is an element of very inappropriate language being used by parliamentarians these days. So if I give you one example, we have very recently seen Tandesi speak in the House, and he has criticised Boris Johnson using language which is pretty unparliamentary. It's hugely inappropriate to use the sort of language that was used. Now, very recently we've had Angela Rayner, who is the deputy leader of the Labour Party, referring to fellow parliamentarians as scumbags, which is, we wouldn't permit our children to use such language, and to hear it being used by the deputy leader of the main opposition party, it's an indication of how standards have fallen and how the parliamentarians themselves are contributing towards creating a very, very unpleasant atmosphere. She, in one breath, it was noted by somebody, in one breath she would say, "My learned friend, the MP from Dorset or whatever, and then in the next breath you refer to parliamentarians as scumbags. The whole element of hypocrisy and duplicity, deceit, is something that's coming very much to the fore. So I think there is a very serious need for those who are public figures, leaders, and role models to really review the level of the quality of language, the level of toxicity that they themselves are contributing. It's contributing towards a general sense in the whole country of dissatisfaction with politics and uncertainty and fear. And if you notice that fear has been compounding ever since the COVID issue was appeared on our horizons, cumulatively, there is a very fragile sense in the country, and that needs to be addressed by leaders.
Panditji, I'm getting back to the unfortunate killing of the Honorable MP. You see, I am spotting a trend here, which is across the world. It's not just limited to United Kingdom. That the concept of who we are, there is some confusion about this for some people, and no matter how much we say this thing again and again, somehow this gets lost in the heat of the moment. By what I'm trying to say is, we are all human beings first, then we are the citizens of a certain country, then we are something else, something else. We could be from a certain state, and then we could be professing a certain religion, a certain faith, a certain denomination, and so on. But this order, which has been around since Westphalian consensus emerged, it's a consensus, and somehow this is getting lost. And somehow, when you go back to see the root cause of these problems, it invariably points to that and to a certain religion. It's really, really unfortunate, Panditji, for us to be pointing this out. But there was also a recent study in the United Kingdom that talked about who
Mm,
is
mm.
perpetrating some of these things. And again, this religion, the members of this religion, are up and away. They are not even close to the average. They are far out on the right. And perhaps you can share some numbers, Panditji, and
Yeah.
let's try to understand what is going wrong here.
So I think this is a great opportunity to clarify one or two of these points. Firstly, in our Sanatan tradition, we accept that every human being is born potentially on the journey to connect with divinity within that lifetime. We do not acknowledge this nonsense that people can be born sinners and criminal by birth and all this rubbish that has emerged over the last few centuries and millennia. We accept that every human being is divinity incarnate on a journey to reconnect with that divinity. And so after a child appears, what that child is taught is without doubt something to be considered when we look at what's happening to that child in their lifetime. And it's also unavoidable that there are ideologies which need to be reviewed. Now, the Nazi ideology was something which ultimately resulted in the Second World War. And that was a rejection of an ideology. It wasn't a rejection of human beings. There was no alternative except to engage in physical violence with human beings who wanted to spread that ideology. And that war resulted in millions of deaths. It's the ideologies and the ideas that we have to reconsider. And just because an ideology wears the title of a religion, it should not be given a get out of jail free card. This is a complete and utter irrational statement and irrational expectation. Equally, no ideology should be given some sort of protection over and above any other ideology. There is no necessity, no requirement, and history teaches that's an incredibly unwise position to adopt. So with that in mind, I'm going to just share with you a report which came out not so long ago. And that report was in March 2021. It was a government report about the ethnicity and the religion of terrorist and extremist prisoners in the United Kingdom. And it's worth noting there are quite a few very interesting observations that this report found. Bearing in mind that we are predominantly a white country, the ethnicity of this United Kingdom is predominantly white. So a total of 68 persons, 32%, shall we say. And if that's not unreasonable, in fact, it's relatively low, 32% in a what I would say 80-85% majority white nation. And then we have white, mixed, Asian or Asian British. And this is where the first aberration occurs. Asian or Asian British, 98 individuals, 46%. So almost half of all people who are from a Asian or Asian British ethnicity background, almost half of the figures engaged in terrorism come from that particular background. Very strange. And then we've looked at the black and black British and other ethnic groups. They're relatively small. They also parameterize according to the religious parameter. And you'll see that 12% of the terror and extremist crimes were committed by Christians, but 73% in the United Kingdom, an extraordinarily statistically significant figure of 156 individuals, 73% just for Muslims. Buddhists and the Jewish community are at 1%, no religion are at 10%. So there is something here. You can't trace it to ethnicity. Remember, culture and the way in which a civilization functions is very much tied and connected with the ethnicity of a group. But the ideology, that ideology and the aberration of 156, i.e. 73%, this warrants further investigation. And so this is something that the government has obviously highlighted now, and I'm hoping that we will see further attention paid to it. This is not something that can be ignored.
Uh, Panditji, what you just said was very sobering, and I mean, this we have to turn the tide. I mean, we're all human beings, and we need to make life better for us as well as for people around us. And then that is one of the basic precepts of Sanatana Dharma, that when you leave the world, you make it a better place than what you came into. And I'm just hopeful that through it's a long journey. That's all I can say. I mean, I hope that
It is.
better sense prevails, and people see the virtues of this. Certainly, one of the foundational aspects of the Dharma, yoga, is very popular now. And again, there you're taught some of these concepts. I'm hoping that this slowly spreads out, because at one point in time, all of us were Sanatanis, isn't it? I mean, it's just how far back you want to go in history.
Sree, it's a strange situation humanity finds itself in. Until we revert to having a dharmocracy at the
Yes.
ascendant, which has always been the pinnacle of civilizations. None of the other civilization models have attained that height. And we, as an alternative, democracy is what we are all working with. But there are some fundamental principles in a democracy. And if you revisit those, you see those fundamental principles being threatened on a daily basis. One of the principles is that society decides not to engage in physical violence. It decides to delegate its own physical protection to the state. It says that we will not carry knives, swords, guns, etc. We will not seek our own justice. What we will do is we will delegate that to the state, and the state will then protect us. The state shoulders that responsibility. And in order for the state to protect all of the citizens of a democracy, the citizens of a democracy, they pay taxes. This is the fundamental principle. And yet these recent attacks, we have seen genuine, vulnerable citizens of the British democracy being killed. We have seen this happen time and time again, and the statistics that we just had a look at, they seem to indicate that there's an ideology which is at fault. It's partly responsible, if not significantly responsible, for what is happening, and it must be revisited. This is not by accident. As you mentioned, there is a profile which is related to this ideology. On a global basis, it's being questioned. We have seen recent attacks in France. We have seen other attacks elsewhere. And the scale and the quantity demands attention of this ideology. But my worry is this, that in a democracy, the leading lights, the mood of the country, the standards, they lie in our leaders. Our leaders must safeguard those those standards which become aspirations for everybody else. And when our leaders abandon them, society and democracy really needs to then sit back and work out, how do we proceed? What do we do to protect our vulnerable people from violence? And I'm really troubled at the moment because I don't see the leadership in the United Kingdom stepping into that space and accepting that responsibility.
Well, we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. In the meanwhile, Panditji, I read somewhere that the Labour Member of Parliament, Claudia Webbe, is embroiled in a case, and I think the verdict must have been handed down in the recent past. What happened? Can you apprise us of what really played out here? And was there
Certainly.
a ruling?
Yes, it's a case that has been going through the courts for many months now. And as exactly as you say, well spotted, last week, the magistrates tried the case. Claudia appeared in front of the magistrates and she was found guilty. And details of exactly what the charges were and the evidence that was presented, it's worth having a review of. Remember, Labour is the party which, like many of the left and centre-left parties, claims to be the champion of the minorities, of vulnerable people. And so its own parliamentarians are really expected to hold themselves to very high standards, the standards which their party preaches. But the dreadful um, the evidence that's been put forward in front of the court, it really does provide a very uh, detailed look at who Claudia Webbe is and what is behind the smiling facade. Um, the judgment, it stated that she had texted threatening messages to another lady. So the messages included threats involving the word acid. There are groups of women's rights groups in the United Kingdom who have acted on behalf of women who have been attacked with acid. They've had acid thrown in their face, and they have all come out very, very vocally, expressing their dissatisfaction with Claudia's behaviour. And so she has been removed from the Labour Party. She sits in Parliament as an independent, but the news at the moment is that she's actually going to challenge and appeal against this judgment. Now, Leicester has had 32 years plus Claudia's couple of years, so almost 35 years of Labour parliamentarians. And we all saw the terrible standards which were revealed about Keith Vaz regarding rent boys and cocaine and all of that sort of stuff. And now Claudia has been found guilty of using harassment and threatening violence on another lady. This needs to stop. I think Leicester has probably had enough of Labour. Labour have had more than enough of a chance, and in the last election we saw that there was that dramatic swing of, I think, 22,000 majority was reduced to something like 4,000. It was almost a 16,000 loss, which is a massive shift. And so Claudia's sentencing is due next week. If she is given a custodial sentence, then a by-election is called. She has said that she's going to appeal it, but the majority of parliamentarians are advising her that she really needs to resign. Parliament itself is being besmirched. The reputation of parliamentarians is being dragged through the mud by this behaviour. And it's not just one, it's one MP after another MP after another MP. So this needs to stop, and it'd be a pleasant change to see some parliamentarians now actually holding themselves to a very, very high standard. It's long overdue. We need to see this.
Satishji, you were part of a conference that was constituted by the Labour Party, where you went and you spoke at that conference. Perhaps you can summarize for us what was that conference about and what you said, and has the Labour now started looking inward as well as looking outwards to try and see the error of their ways in terms of being inclusive. I'm not going to say that they're exclusive, that being inclusive, because you and I, and for that matter, many of the citizens, we want a robust functioning democracy in whichever country we are in. So, to that end, perhaps you can quickly tell us what was this, conference about, and what transpired at that point, and has the Labour Party made any moves to try and be more inclusive?
Well, I think this is actually a very, very important moment for the Labour Party. 12 years ago, one of the shadow ministers on the front bench, he wrote a very lengthy article and report in which he indicated that entryism by Islamists into the Labour Party had become a major problem and it needed to be addressed. Now, at that time, it wasn't taken particularly seriously, but since then we saw the Labour Party transform into a party which had a number of characteristic policies. And if I just delineate those policies, firstly, there was this huge problem with anti-Semitism. The hatred towards Jews was something which almost brought the Labour Party probably into the lowest levels and virtually brought them into having to stand criminal charges in front of a judge. It was so apparent. In addition to that, they supported the Palestinian cause, they supported the Kashmiri cause, and time again, there were resolutions passed which were anti-Hindu, anti-India. And so the assessment that Islamist entryism has occurred, it really was a prescient observation. And I think under the Jeremy Corbyn years, we saw it proliferate. The party changed from being a voice of the working class majority white people in this country, who were really the backbone of the traditional Labour Party. It changed from being their voice into a voice of all of the groups who Jeremy Corbyn and his far left friends, John McDonnell, etc., supported, and not a voice of the British community. Slowly under Keir Starmer's leadership, this has begun to change. And it's a change for the better. I don't think he's given particularly enough credit, but the changes at the top that he has brought in, I have sensed that those changes are a move in the right direction. So when a friend of mine, who actually we've had very robust words with each other about the relationship between the Labour Party and Hindus, Dr. Patil, he is a Hindu and a staunch Labour member. He organised this group and received official approval from the Labour Party called Hindus for Labour. It's hard to be a pioneer, it's hard to be ahead of the curve. You know what they say about pioneers always receiving bloody noses. Well, he was, his initiative, shall we say, was received with a great deal of criticism. And what he did is he organised an event at the Labour Party conference for Hindus for Labour, and he invited the major Hindu umbrella organizations, those which present themselves as having the mandate to speak on behalf of the Hindu community. He invited their leadership, and their leadership rejected his invitation. They refused to participate, which I thought was actually very unfortunate. And to be perfectly honest, I think they lapsed in their duty to engage with every political party on behalf of the Hindu community. I don't think they acted wisely in rejecting it. And so when I'd heard that this was the case, and Neeraj, he had also invited me to speak, I felt it was necessary to represent the Hindu voice at the Labour Party conference. We have had no voice for the best part of a decade, so it needed to be done. And it was wonderful that it happened, because I got an opportunity to speak with one of the shadow ministers, the Minister for Communities and Local Government, Steve Reed. And I presented to him the position, a little bit of the history, and indeed where the Labour Party had found itself, and the mistakes that they had made time and time again in their engagement with India, the world's largest democracy, the manner in which they engage with Prime Minister Modi, the one democratic leader who has received the greatest democratic mandate in history. And yet, despite all of these credentials, the British Labour Party was completely, shall we say, they leveraged hate speech. They leveraged all of those unpleasant, toxic phrases and attitudes against somebody who has peerless democratic credentials. So I had the opportunity to present this at conference, and I must say, I was encouraged by the reception which my words received. And Steve Reed, for the first time, actually announced and made a few statements which were completely new. They were statements which officially had not been expressed, but he made it very clear that the Labour Party acknowledged and understood that it had made mistakes in distancing itself from the British Hindu community. And the acknowledgement of mistakes of this sort is the first step towards having a conversation and a bridge being built. But one of the other things which he also said was that he acknowledged that British had a colonial past, and that having been the nation which wreaked such havoc on India, what his words were, he said, given our colonial history, to interfere in the politics of India, absolutely that is not appropriate. Now, this is totally contrary to the resolution that had been passed at the Labour conference only a couple of years ago. And so this is now being seen as a sea change. And personally, I think it's a great opportunity which we should seize, we should engage. It's fundamentally necessary for the British Hindu community to have a voice at the table for each and every party, each and every position. We should be present there. And when an opportunity is given, our representatives and those who speak on our behalf, they need to seize that opportunity with both hands and make sure our perspective is heard. So this was actually a really great development, and I think we will look back on this and think back. Actually, Dr. Patil's initiative was ahead of the curves. A lot of work to be done. Labour's position on some of the other things that impact upon us has a long way to go. But I think a corner has been turned, and we really should engage with this and make a big difference. So I would congratulate Dr. Patil and his little group, Hindus for Labour. I wish them well, and I think all Hindus who are in the Labour Party should really give him and his team support, and let's have a genuine strong voice on the left, as we have somehow managed to establish on the right.
Absolutely, sir. And in fact, today is the memorial or the day of remembrance for a local chieftain who was hung by the East India Company on this very day in 1799. It's a small town called Panjala Kurichi, which is way down in the south near Kanyakumari. And this guy refused to pay taxes. He was born in 1760 and he died, or he was hung to death in 1799. What is gruesome is that, and his crime was that he refused to acknowledge the East India Company's sovereignty and refused to pay taxes. And for that, in fact, he fought a war, and he actually defeated the general, and then they came back with a stronger force. And of course, they found somebody who betrayed him, and that's how they captured him. But the takeaway here is that under the East India Company, they were much more ruthless, plunderers, because what they did was they had the adjoining chieftains witness the live hanging of this guy, because the message was, if you don't play by the rules, you would be the next one. So my humble pronouns to Veerapandiya Kattabomman. In fact, the British were so afraid that this guy's hanging would create a ruckus that they razed down his fort in Panjalam Kurichi, and they made sure that there is no memory of the records of what happened at that point. And it was only because of grandma tales that happened over the years, and in 19th century, when real reformers who were trying to actually put together the history of the Tamil language, that they came across some music and songs, and that's how this legend of Veerapandiya Kattabomman came to the fore. There was a fine movie that was released under his name, but I just wanted to remember that there were so many such incidents.
Our history is littered with many such incidents, and the history of colonial times is only slowly being addressed, spoken about, and revealed. And it's true, it's a tragedy that one of the characteristics of our history is that there have been betrayals from within our own civilization, within our own culture, within our own communities. And sadly, there are still to this day many people who succumb to the lure and the temptation which modern day colonialists still manage to place in front of them. And we saw this with the DGH conference. We saw them line up to take, what do they say, to take the shilling, the colonialist shilling, and to speak the words which the Christianists would want to have heard, but wouldn't want to say themselves anymore. And this whole phenomenon, we call it brown washing. And basically what it is you find a brown person who can, shall we say, launch the bullets on your behalf. So you place your gun on their shoulders, take a pot shot at a colonialist a target, and then hide in the background and let them bear the brunt of it. As I said, we saw this with DGH, and I think our history is littered with similar examples.
So you segued into the next topic that I wanted to bring up with you, Panditji, and that is that looks like the tail of this DGH conference is again wagging, and looks like there's a 2-day conference in the United Kingdom.
Yes, you saw my tweet of a couple of days ago.
Yes, I
So I
did.
received, so I received intelligence that this was happening, and that was the first thing which I found really encouraging. In the past, we never had a network. We never had people who were watching out and looking to take note of these events as they occurred, but now we do. And so some of my very close and dear friends, they sent me information that this conference was happening. And here's what's going on. It's exactly the same cut and paste, really. And it is tragic because it's masquerading as an academic conference again. What it is that the DGH conference, it had one panel. And in that panel, there were a number of speakers led by Professor Meena Danda. And Meena Danda is a professor at Wolverhampton University. And hers was the terrible panel in which the most hate inciting words and phrases were used. The most prejudiced and discriminatory language was used. Hers was the panel in which people said people with the surname of Sharma, Trivedi, and I think Chatterjee are inclined to being violent people. And hers was the session in which they spoke about the problem being Hinduism and not Hindutva. They revealed their true nature, and their true nature was that they were leveraging every academic avenue to do nothing other than pour hatred and scorn and to incite criticism and contempt for Hindus and the Hindu traditions, Hinduphobia. So this Dr. Meena Danda, she is at Wolverhampton University, and Wolverhampton University has, it seems, got a little cell of toxic brown washers, if I can use that language. And what they've organized, it seems quite innocent on the surface, anti-caste thought, theory, politics and culture. But I'm disappointed that the criticisms that were leveraged and directed at the DGH conference have not been taken note of. One of the criticisms was that for something to be truly a conversation amongst academics, you need to have at least two opposing sides, two sides of any particular coin considered, so that views can be placed in front of the student body, which are varied, diverse, often conflicting, and that students can learn about those differing views, but they can also, in the same process, acquire the faculty to discriminate, to be able to analyze, to be able to dissect, and then come to conclusions. In the absence of two different views being presented, it's not academic, it's propaganda. And that's the problem. We saw the propaganda of the DGH conference, and now we're seeing the propaganda of this anti-caste thought. The other dimension which is problematical is that although it's anti-caste, the individual they're talking about, I'm sure you heard of who the individual is. There's a project which they've entitled Freedom from Caste, the Political Thought of Periyar E.V. Ramasamy in a Global Context. Now, just saying those words, just saying those words, it will draw a particular response, because those who know of Ramasamy will know of his philandering, will know of his delight in intoxicants, will know of his frequenting of red light areas, will know of how he abused his wife. They will also know that he was the person who approved of Hitler's final solution. In fact, he proposed that this was the only solution to the problems, all the problems of India. He recommended that the Brahmins themselves needed to be exterminated. And so when you bear in mind the language of the 21st century, where one is not allowed to say that 84% of Pakistani grooming gangs are actually with 84% Pakistani Muslims, You have to say Asians to be politically correct. But somehow the converse or the same philosophy doesn't apply when it comes to the British Hindu community or Hindus generally, and Brahmins specifically, and Sharmas even multiply specifically so. It seems to be that they think it's relevant to present such a hate-inspired and hate-infused person as a person who contributed to the political thought of the global world community. So you can see that this is another one of those very thinly veiled attacks on Hindus and Hinduism, and on the community of people who sacrificed the opportunities to be wealthy, to be comfortable, in the pursuit of two things. One, to preserve knowledge, and secondly, to share it as broadly and as widely as possible across the Indian subcontinent. That is what the Brahmin community always did, and that's what they still do to this date. And so the fact that we have a Dr. Meena Dhanda, who is of Indian origin but not a Hindu, she declares herself as having been not brought up in a Hindu environment, and yet she is available to the faculty at Wolverhampton University to act in that manner. She is doing exactly what was done by those brown people who took up rifles and shot bullets into the gathering at Jallianwala Bagh. Behind them was the infamous General Dyer, and as I said, brownwashing, yet again another example. So this is happening at the end of October. We've spoken with a few of our friends, we've spoken with members of the community. We're going to be sharing information about this particular event, and I'm hoping that many members of our community will engage with the authorities at Wolverhampton University to advise them that either they are unknowingly being used by a group of people who want to incite hatred of Hindus, Hinduism, and particularly the community of priests and teachers. Either they're being knowingly used or they're being unknowingly used. But what is evident is that they are being used, and the intention is not to promote community cohesion and better understanding. It's to lay the seeds and to water the already laid seeds of hatred and incitement to violence, and it must be responded to.
Absolutely, and a couple of interesting tidbits about Periyar. Actually, I should say E.V. Ramasamy Nayakar. I refuse to call him Periyar.
Yes,
Periyar means an elder man.
I know.
His conduct was anything but. So this person used to describe Tamils, and I'm going to say the Tamil word, which is Kattumirandigal, which crudely translated into English means country brutes. That's how he used to describe the people around him, around whom he lived. And the interesting part is it's that he is the leader that the current government, the party that is in power in Tamil Nadu, swears by. For everything, they'll invoke this person. So there is, I can tell you, there is a definite link here, because as soon as this conference starts going on, or the bus starts, you can be sure that they are going to blanket the entire Tamil Nadu media with these messages and so on and so forth. If there's any way we can stop them on their tracks, because this is just blatant lies. We don't have a problem if you want to take a particular view. Give us a chance to defend, or give you a counterpoint.
Correct. That's the heart of it. I don't think for a moment we would want to cancel the event or demand that they not be allowed to hold it or anything like that. But as an academic institution, their responsibility is to explore fully the issues that are being discussed, and to deny a perspective which is equally historical and very much more relevant to the issue at hand is prejudice, is discrimination. You know, it's akin to somebody saying, well, Hitler was the one who invented the Volkswagen. So what we should do is let's have a conversation about Hitler's contribution to global automotive science, and let's have a discussion on those aspects. You can't have that discussion without then saying, well, hold on one moment. We also need to consider the other aspects, the context and the environment in which his contribution to science manifested. You cannot raise the person as being some sort of a role model, or somebody who can be deemed to have contributed to global thought, without looking at all of his thoughts. And that's the issue. That's what makes this not an academic conference, but an act of anti-Hindu, anti-Brahmin hatred. It's hate speech.
Absolutely. And viewers, with that, we come to the end of our hangout with Panditji today. Panditji, as always, a pleasure to talk to you, sir. And thank you very much. And namaskar.
Jai Shri Ram ji, Pranam ji, Namaskar ji, Sree ji, and best wishes to you. We have just had Navratri concluded. I hope everybody received the benefits of Devi Shakti, and that we're all energized and infused with Pran Shakti so that we can continue to the next steps. And let's prepare for a Diwali, which will be a Diwali to remember. Best wishes to everyone. Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.